Karen, hello again, and welcome to our podcast brought to you by
Oh,
Titi and me,
thank you very much
and
for
and
being.
and
I'm so
welcome to everybody who's here, who's joined us this evening, this morning, and various other times of the day. Karen, so I'll let you introduce yourself in your own words. Tell us especially about you know your early education and how you got into this business. And was there a specific moment when you were bitten by the storytelling bug?
sure happy to. And I'm just delighted to be here. I'm still working on my coffee this morning, so I don't know if you can
Okay.
see that, but anyway, my coffee mug is here. Um, all right, so I'm Dr. Karen Dietz, and I'm the best-selling author of Business Storytelling for Dummies. So this is part of the Dummies series, and Wiley approached me to write that book, which I was happy to do with my colleague Lori Silverman. And I'm also a TEDx speaker, and I've been working in the field of business storytelling for like well over 20 years, long before it was popular. And so I remember in the early days, you'd tell somebody, oh, yes, I work in the field of business storytelling. And they'd look at you like, what the hell is that? And, why would I be interested in that? So anyway, here we are 20 years later. We've made a lot of progress, and I'm delighted to, be here today to share with you some of the things that I've learned. But, I've got a doctorate in folklore, which is sort of like anthropology. And folklorists study, well, how a group or a culture or an organization, how they transmit their knowledge and their values and their wisdom all through the power of storytelling, as an example. That's one of the things that we look at. When I was in graduate school getting my doctorate, we learned a lot about storytelling, like how to collect stories and how to preserve them and how to diagram them. And I wasn't interested in storytelling that much in graduate school until someone came into the department. He was a Chippewa Cree Native American Indian from up in Canada. He held all of the sacred stories for his tribe. And I heard him start to share his stories. And I was so entranced. And I looked at the other people in the room who were listening to his stories, and we were so captivated. And it was then that I experienced the real power of storytelling. And I experienced this over and over and over again, that when Ron Evans would tell his stories, that was the name of the gentleman who held all those sacred stories. And when Ron would share his stories and we would listen to his stories, I realized we could have sat there for 2 weeks straight and listening to his stories and still wanting more. So I'm kind of going, oh, that's the power of storytelling. So, um, but after I got my degree, it was still too early for business storytelling to emerge. So I could never tell anybody that I was working with stories when I was a consultant to large companies, and or else I would never get hired. So I would say, "Oh yes, I'm doing other kind of work," but I was still doing all of my story work. Then enough books had been written about the power of storytelling with some colleagues of mine here in the US. And my executive started to say, oh, maybe we should think about the stories that, we want to tell. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay, so something has changed. And I said, oh, maybe now's the time to really declare, what I'm doing, that I am a storyteller, in business, and this is what I help people with. So that happened about the year 2000, 2001, and I haven't looked back. It's been an amazing adventure.
Fantastic. I get the feeling that I've read a lot about how stories affect the mind, and we've kind of like to go all scientific about things, but I get the feeling from what you're saying that there is almost a mystical connection that happens when you tell a story.
Yes.
Between the teller and the
when all
listener.
the yes, when all the ingredients are there, then the listener becomes transported, right? We have that experience of transport. And that happens for the teller also. And so the one thing to always keep in mind is that it's an experience that happens between the teller and the listener. And in my circles and here in the United States, we talk a lot about storytelling being a co-created experience. It's something that happens together between the teller and the audience. And so that's really different when we think about, oh, storytelling is a formula. Just give me the formula for an effective story. Well, I can give you the formula. But what you really want is to get to that place of transport. And the reason you want to do that is because the audience then will be powerfully impacted by the story. They'll remember it, they'll repeat it, it will mean something to them. And the other thing that happens is that when you tell a really good story and you're in that dynamic, that co-created experience, is that this is where alignment happens. And alignment is critically important in business so that everyone is on the same page.
So that is why a story works better in communicating, in communications, even in the business situation, more than, say, a straightforward directive or a logical statement. So could you tell us how the brain processes a story differently from, say, a straightforward directive or a set of instructions?
Oh, sure. Yeah, let's do it. So I'm going to share a quick story, and then we'll talk a little bit about it, and then I'm going to do something else, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll compare what happens, right? Because I think that's the most powerful way for me to answer your question.
Right.
So
what did you do?
We're in Paris, right? And it's a gorgeous spring day. It's kind of day where, and I don't know, there are some places I know in India that are much colder than others. And so it's that kind of spring day where you can feel still the cold from winter, but you can also smell that new growth. And on that gorgeous spring day, there's a poet who lived in Paris, and he said, oh, I've got to go for a walk. And so he does. And as he's walking down the streets of Paris, he spots ahead of him this beggar that's sitting on the sidewalk. And the beggar is sitting next to a coffee and pastry shop. There's a bell above the door. A lot of people are walking in and out of the shop. And as the poet gets closer to the beggar, the poet's name is Jacques, by the way. As Jacques gets closer to the beggar, he sees that the beggar has a sign in front of him. And Jacques reads the sign. It says, blind, no pension, please give. And there's a cup in front of the beggar for people to put coins in. Well, Jacques asked the beggar, how's it going? And the beggar just, it's terrible. Just people are not stopping and talking to me. They're certainly not putting coins in my cup. She says, I really don't know how I'm going to make it because I'm at the end of my rope. Well, Jacques takes a look at the sign and he says, well, may I change your sign? And the beggar goes, oh, well, no. Well, okay, but on the backside, so I can turn it around if I need to. So the next thing that blind beggar hears is the scratch of Jacques' pen on that cardboard. And then Jacques puts the cardboard sign back down next to the beggar, bids him good day, and continues his walk. Oh, a couple weeks later, and another one of those gorgeous spring days, and Jacques takes another walk, uses the same route that he does before, sees the beggar up ahead of him, decides to check in, see how he's doing. And the beggar goes, oh, it's amazing. People are stopping and talking to me. They're putting coins in my cup. Says, I think I'm going to be okay. I'm really happy. So Jacques says, okay, great. Well, I'm so happy for you, and bids him good day to continue on his walk. But the beggar says, wait, I've got to know, what did you write on my sign? And Jacques says, oh, that was easy. I simply wrote, spring is coming, but I will not see it. That's it. Spring is coming, but I will not see it. All right. So everybody get ready to put something in the chat box. How many people saw images in their minds as they were listening to the story that I told? Now, there are no right or wrong answers. So it's just an experience here of the different things that people saw. So put in the chat box, if you can, some of the things that you were seeing. Like, did you see Paris, or did you see a street similar to Paris? Maybe someplace else from your background. Did you see the poet? Did you see the beggar? What did you see? So, right, we said, oh yeah, I could visualize the story. You saw lots of images. Yeah, I'm sure everybody saw images. So what were those images? If you saw the poet, what did he look like? And so the next question that I always ask somebody, the lively street, right? Yeah, people often see the lively street. And some people saw the Paris and the beggar. Oh, some people saw the signboard. I see, not everybody sees the sign. Not everybody sees the sky. You saw the man on the sidewalk, and you saw flower baskets. See, that's really interesting. And you saw the beggar's clothes. Some people don't see the beggar at all, and there's not a strong image that comes to mind. You could see the cafe. Great. Now, what did you hear? Like, are there things that you heard as I was telling the story? Somebody saw the bakery, but what did you hear? Oh, right, you saw the bakery, and you could also smell the fresh bread. Absolutely. So what did you hear? What did you smell? Right? And you could hear the birds chirping. See, I love that. And the tinkling of the pennies going into the cup. Fabulous. Right? And did anybody taste anything? Sometimes people can taste that coffee or taste that pastry. And so sometimes that happens. Oh, the scratching of the pen. Some people heard that. And the beggar speaking out. So you see, now here's the kind of making my point for me, is that people see and smell and taste and feel different things as they're going through this story. But did I describe a lot of what was in the story? Like, did I tell you what the beggar looked like? Oh, the crepes cooking. I love that. Did I tell you what the day looked like? Did I tell you what the poet looked like?
No.
So if I wasn't doing that, what do you think was happening? And Shruti or Justin, pop in here, and if you have an answer to what you think was happening, please share it. So as I was telling the story, what were you doing?
It was like a movie playing in my head. I was just visualizing the whole thing, and it was filling up a lot of the gaps which you weren't necessarily describing.
Right. So you were filling in the details from your own imagination.
Yeah.
Great. Now, that happens all the time in storytelling. But do you think that you would be able sometime tomorrow even, when you're with a friend or a colleague or a family member, that you think you could tell this story about the poet and the beggar in your own way?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay, great. And I love you. I keep putting things in the chat box as we go through this. All right, now I'm going to do something different. Now, all right, here we go. Now, I'm going to share some information with you, and let's see what happens to your brain. This is a little piece, a paper written on the neural story net. Okay, so first proposed by evolutionary biologists, the following concept has been extensively tested by developmental psychologists and other neuroscientists. For 150,000 years before writing existed, that is, before any alternative informational archival system other than human memory, humans relied on story and on storytelling to convey and to archive in human memory essential histories, concepts, facts, beliefs, and attitudes. That long-term dependency has evolutionarily hardwired human brains to understand and to make sense of incoming narrative and to experience information in specific story terms. The story creating, understanding, or make sense regions of the human brains are linked from before birth into a fixed neural net tasked with interpreting incoming narrative and experiential information. All right, so as I was sharing that information, how many people saw images come to their mind?
I was thinking, what does that even mean?
That's right. Were you seeing anything? Were you hearing anything? Were you tasting anything? Were you feeling anything except maybe a little bored?
And confused, yeah.
Yeah.
And confused, right? It's like, what does it mean? Okay, how many could remember what I just said and be able to repeat it?
Oh. This is like studying for exams in school and how I struggle to remember details.
Right, right. Now, remember the last presentation you sat through at work. And what was it more like? Was it more like the story or more like the information I shared?
Just like
The
the
latter.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, now we give presentations like that at work because we want people to make some sort of a decision. We want people to remember what is being shared, and we want them to make a decision. What is the likelihood of that happening?
Oh, very little.
I know, yeah.
They'll forget it the moment they walk out of the meeting room.
Absolutely. They may even wonder what they're doing sitting in that room.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Right, right. So we have to learn to work with the brain. And neuroscientists, particularly Yuri Hassan from the Princeton Neuroscience Institute here in the United States, for years, I wanted neuroscientists to take images, brain images, of what was happening when a teller was telling a story and somebody was listening to a story. And I wanted that to happen in real time so we could see what was happening in both brains. And here's what the neuroscientists discovered. If you haven't heard this already, if you have, bear with me. But what they discovered is that the teller, when the teller was telling the story, 7+ areas of the brain were lit up. These included the areas of sight, sound, smell, taste, feel, right? Also the language processing areas of the brain. So a lot of different areas of the brain were lit up. Then they looked at the listener's brain and they saw, oh, wow, the exact same areas of the brain are lit up in the listener's brain. Oh, except there was one difference. And that was that in the listener's brain, there was another area that was activated, and that was the area that's anticipating what is coming next. That's pretty cool.
That is.
Then they determined how long it took for the teller's brain and the listener's brain for their brains to light up together, right? For all those areas of the brains, both brains to light up. And this is what they discovered, right? They measured it. It took between 1 to 2 seconds for the brains to entrain, for the brains to couple. So that's 1, 2. 1, 2. It was like almost instantaneous. Those brains start connecting, right? And then they discovered through those MRIs that the greater the comprehension,
the greater the connection
happened.
Yeah.
Yes. And when more areas of the brain were triggered, the sensory areas of the brain. And so what I was deliberately doing when I was sharing the poet story was to deliberately trigger those parts of the brain in you. And all I had to do was mention there's a coffee shop, there's a bell, there's a baker, there's a poet, we're in Paris, it's a spring day, the chill on the air, you can smell the new growth, right? So all I was doing was triggering you and not having to, I didn't need to give you a lot of details because I knew you were going to fill in the details.
Yeah.
Now, I have even had some people tell me when I go through this activity with them, oh, actually, I became the poet. I saw everything through the poet's eyes. It's like, wow, are you kidding me? You were just imagining it. You became the poet? What more could you ask for in terms of connection?
Absolutely.
So that's the power of storytelling. So
Fantastic.
I'll get off my soapbox about that.
Karen, so I know you conduct workshops for organizations and, towards helping them craft and hone their stories. And so obviously it takes time to teach them this. But if you were to bump into a company chief executive and he asks you, so Karen, you're in the business of business storytelling. Can you tell me how it works and why I need to consider it to, for my company? You have
great question, Justin.
You have literally seconds or a minute to talk to him, to tell him.
Well, I'll share something like this. I'll immediately go into a story. I won't try to explain it. I'll say, oh God, I'm so glad you asked. What a great question, because it is a great question. Everybody wants to know the answer to that question. Right? So I'll say, oh, did you ever hear about Lakeland Medical Center in the United States? And the person will say, no. And I say, oh, okay, well, this is a great example. I think this will, when I share this, you'll understand. Right? So Lakeland Medical Center, I don't know if you know, but here in the United States, when a medical group of doctors and physicians who provide medical services, if they have very high patient satisfaction scores, they get reimbursed from the government because that means they're doing a good job and they're doing a lot of preventive medicine, which is good, keeps all the costs down. And so patient satisfaction scores are a key measure for success for a medical group. Well, this organization continued to have their patient satisfaction scores very low, like down in the 35th percentile. Now, that organization threw time, money, resources at those numbers to try to raise them up, and nothing was working. So the CEO went home one evening and had an epiphany, one of those aha moments. And he said, I know what we need to do. We just need to focus on delivering compassionate care. And that was one of their values, by the way, delivering compassionate care. He said, but what I'm going to do, what I want to have happen is I want us, anytime anybody in the organization sees somebody delivering compassionate care, whether it's the janitor all the way up to a senior administrator, says, I want to hear that story. And so they set up a system so that whoever saw somebody delivering compassionate care would write up that story. And then the organization would share that story, and they would acknowledge both the person who captured the story, right?
Yep.
And also they would reward the person who was delivering that compassionate care. So they were doing story collection and story sharing of those experiences. And what happened? Well, 90 days later, that's not a very long time, right? 90 days, 6,000 stories later. Just imagine that. 90 days, 6,000 stories they collected of people delivering compassionate care. Those patient satisfaction scores shot up to the 95th percentile, and that's where they stayed. And do you know of anything that is fairly easy to implement, doesn't take much time, and look at the power of what happened, the results? So that's just one experience, right, that I could share. But I bet that CEO who asked that question is going to go, oh my God, now I know the power of storytelling. Right?
True, true.
So does that answer your question, Justin, do you think?
It does. It does. So what I'm also inferring is that in the course of capturing the stories, you're actually also influencing the quality of care that's being delivered.
Right. So what happened is that all of a sudden people started to recognize, instead of it being invisible, compassionate care became visible. And people became excited. Oh, this is what's happening. And don't we feel good about it? It was building pride. It was building trust, right? It was building dependability. I can depend on you. I know you're going to deliver compassionate care. I'm not just the only one here doing it, right? Oh, together we are doing it. So here we have alignment then about compassionate care, but it's not because of a value that is posted on a wall somewhere. Oh, we deliver compassionate care. No, we're actually doing it. This is how we're living it.
Yeah.
And that's what people got excited about. And that is what the patients themselves began to experience. And then as a result, the patient satisfaction scores went high.
That's right.
True.
That's right.
True. So actually, Karen, you've almost answered my next question also. My next question was around the fact that, we have understood wonderfully how stories work and how successfully they impact our brains. But sometimes even now in business environment, we struggle to push through, that stories can do the same kind of magic in business. So like I said, your second story of the hospital has kind of answered that question. But I'll take it to the next level and say that, do you have any examples or any instances or any study that, wherein we can make storytelling a business case? Is there an ROI of storytelling? So why should a company spend that much of money to teach their employees storytelling or start implementing storytelling in various departments, various in sales,
right,
in data? So
I think
what do we
either
really
I
tell
froze
them?
or you froze, Shorty.
Sorry?
Yeah, I think I got it, right? You froze there, so that's all right. So this happens sometimes on Zoom. We just carry on. All right, so let me see. I can answer your question in a couple different ways. First of all, there are different ROIs depending on what the organization is trying to do. And so one of the things that we have to do as business storytellers is understand a particular business and what they're trying to accomplish, and then to find a story that helps them understand the power of business storytelling. There are a few articles about the ROI of storytelling, but what most companies want to hear is how the bottom line is improved through storytelling.
Mm.
And there was a research project conducted a few years ago here in the United States. A group of researchers wanted to know, well, if we sold a product online, if there was a story attached to it, what would happen? Right? Would it sell faster? Would it sell for more? I mean, what would happen? And so they went out to garage sales. You know, people on Sunday or Saturday morning, they, you know, put things out in their yard and sell it to the neighbors. And so they went to a lot of these garage sales. They picked up maybe about 100 objects, and they didn't spend any more than $1, right, for each object. And my favorite, there were a number of stories that came out of that project. My favorite is the one about they bought a statue of a horse's head.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the researchers, this is what happened to all of the objects, a researcher would write a story, a personal story about that object and the meaning it had for them. And so one of the researchers took this a statue of a horse's head and wrote a little story about her relationship with that statue, how much she loved it, what it meant to her, and her memories of that. And then they put all of the objects online along with the story. And the bottom line, this is what they discovered, is that, yes, the stories and the connected with the objects meant that the objects sold faster, but they also, the price point was really high. So the horse's head statue, they bought for 99 cents and they sold it for like $36.
Mm-hmm.
True.
That is a huge price increase. And in fact, when they averaged it out of across all of those hundreds of objects, it was like a 6,000% increase in price.
Absolutely.
And those, it sounds like astronomical. How can we believe those numbers? But over and over again, that theory has been tested, and it continues to show that because I attach a story to my product or service, now the price, I can charge a really high price, much higher price than if the story wasn't there. So gosh, what's not to love about that? How's that for a great ROI?
True, true. Absolutely. So on the similar line, staying in the business segment, you know, when storytellings have boosted sales, what do you have to say about when you have a lot of data to present in a meeting, in a conference where the CEO wants to stand on the podium and deliver some sales figures or
Right.
some cost benefits? So there's a
Okay,
huge lot of
so,
data involved. Yeah.
And you froze again. Yeah, go ahead, Shruti. There was a little freezing of the frame there. Go ahead.
No, that's what I said, that when we are standing at the podium and we want to deliver a power pack presentation, but it has a lot of data. Data is extremely important because we want our teams or our employees to understand the cost, the effectiveness of the cost. So how do we really do storytelling in that area?
So I want to back up a minute as an initial way to answer that question, then I'll get into more of the details about what to do with data. So storytelling, you know, the real power of storytelling is in connection and building relationship and building trust. And many companies first, they engage with storytelling because it's a transactional sort of experience. Let me tell you a story, you'll buy my product. Right? But that you can only do that for so long before you're the market, you know, the audience, the purchasers of your product, your customers start figuring that out, and then they say, oh, you're just selling me something, you're just manipulating me. right? So I'll buy something from you. So that doesn't last very long. So you have to go into relationships, so the ROI of storytelling is really, and the real power is in building relationships and trust. So then we get to your question about data. So if you think that data is just, let me give you the information and then you'll know what to do, we see that that's more at the level of transaction. And what we really want is storytelling and data that starts building trust in the relationship. So there are a couple things to do. First of all, you have to be very, very clear on your intent and what you want the audience to do with the data by the time you're done. Because if you don't start out thinking about that and you think, oh, let me just share this data, then they'll leave the room kind of going, well, I'm not so sure what to do with it. And we think that again and again, oh, let me just share the data and the data will do all my work for me. But just like that information article that I shared with you after sharing the poet story, we can see that not much is going to happen. So when I work with a client on this data storytelling piece, the first thing we have to do is organize the data so that it follows a typical story pattern. Because as the poet story demonstrates, there's a journey that I took you on. So what's the setting? What's the problem? What are the action steps? What were the results? And what might this mean? And so we organized the data along that flow. And so what often happens when I work with a client is they'll have their presentation done, they'll have all the data, in a certain order. And then when we apply the story order to it, it changes, right? And so we put things in a story order. And also then we learn, oh, there's a piece missing. Like I forgot the action steps, right? And so there are pieces then, because you put it into a story order, there are pieces that you might find are missing that you need to add in, or you will discover, man, I've got 5 charts trying to make the same point. I don't think I need 5 charts. I can eliminate 4 of those, and here's the most important chart, right, to share with them. And so you can take stuff out of the presentation and really focus it down. So then I'm going to get to the real nitty-gritty. Right? And we have to work with the brain. So when somebody is listening to a story, their brain is relaxed, they kind of sit back, they listen, their imaginations are engaged, all of those senses are being triggered. We call storytelling a whole brain, whole body experience. When a brain is on data, that the brain is working really, really hard to make sense of the data. So to bring it into the brain, to figure out where it should go in the brain, where I can put it in my brain so I'll remember it, and then how am I going to retrieve it, right? So the brain, the brain works really, really hard. And then what happens is cognitive overload, and the brain collapses because it gets tired and it can't sustain that level of energy. Now, guess how long it takes for the brain to collapse with cognitive overload? What's your guess? Anybody?
Minutes, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes of sustained information being bombarded.
When the brain is fresh, right, and it hasn't been working really hard, then it takes about 20 minutes for the brain to collapse. But I clock it at about anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes in an organization, because everybody is already dealing with a lot of information during the day. Emails, charts, graphs, reports, all that kind of good stuff. So our ability to work with that information is small. So what we have to do then is marry data and story together. And what most people do is data, 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 maybe a little story somewhere in there if we're lucky, and then more data. And what we need to do is switch that around and go story, little bit of data, more story, little bit of data, more story, little bit data. And what that does is the brain can relax. When it hears the story, it's like, oh, okay, now I can, catch up. And then you give a little piece of data and the brain works hard. Okay, I can, figure out where to put that in my brain and how to remember it and how to retrieve it. And then you go back into the story and the brain relaxes again, right? And it's still kind of working on that data, but you're giving it space to do that. And then you give another little piece of data. So I call this data sprinkles, right? And that way the brain can actually retain the data that you're sharing and make meaning out of it, and actually then be able to make a decision by the time you're done, right? So that's a big shift. It's almost like we have to do things in reverse from what we think it is going to work, right? And so that I offer that for people to think about and to experiment with and to try out, because when my clients do it, all of a sudden they become much more effective in the organization. And what they say sticks and people remember it and they actually share it, right? Oh, let me hear you. Let me share with you what so-and-so said at the meeting the other day, right? So.
Yeah. That's right.
So does that help?
Absolutely.
Completely. It's fantastic. Yeah. So I'm being very greedy and I'm jumping to yet another area from data to culture,
Yes.
culture in an organization and the way that stories can affect culture. Very specifically,
Mm-hmm.
One hears of acquisitions that happen, and if what I've kind of noticed is that as long as the company name does not change, and its function is pretty much the same, and everybody's doing the same job, the culture remains unchanged. As long as the company name is the same, they retain the whole organization maintains its identity. But if it's acquired and there's a name change that happens, then people are suddenly lost. They're like orphans. They're saying like, where am I? And some of them have worked like 10 plus years in the organization, and they're kind of lost, despite the fact that they're still doing the same work in the same organization, maybe for the same boss. Only the finance controller has been replaced. But, so how does one handle the culture change that happens? I know it's a big thing that organizations deal with. How do you use stories in a situation like that? Because to wait for culture to seep into the organization from the acquiring company can take a very long time.
All right. Oh, what a fabulous question. I wish more companies actually ask that question. So I shared with you that story of Lakeland Medical Group and delivering compassionate care. And for me, right, I think that to answer your question about culture change, it really all is about the values that are important to the company and how those values are lived within the company. Now, when a company is acquired, very often different values become part of the equation. But people don't know how they're living those values, and so they feel lost. And the identity, because our values, how we live our lives, reflects our identity. And so if we can work on that piece of values, what are the new values and how do we live those? How do we catch somebody living that value? How do we share that story so that other people get to see it? Get to experience it, and then get to maybe realize how they're living that value. That's very, very powerful. and story is critical for that, because it's the stories you share about your values that actually shape the culture. They preserve the culture, or you can change a culture just by shifting those stories around the values. And so values and action stories are really critical during times of change. And when identity is kind of
you froze for a few seconds there, Karen, but that's fine. I think
But we get it.
Yeah.
So you froze there, Justin. So
okay.
There seems to be some.
We're all freezing alternatively.
Yeah.
Okay. So Karen, just while we were waiting for you, we were speaking to our audience on a very sensitive topic called, diversity and inclusion and gender disparity and all of such stuff. So this being a very sensitive topic in organizations everywhere, and the fact that, women are still struggling to match up with men as far as some of the senior roles are concerned, probably because of some problems at home and responsibilities and all that. So if we want, through storytelling, to bridge that gap, how do you think that should be done?
Oh, there's a lot to that question, Shruti. And for me, I think it all starts in being able to listen to each other's stories of our experiences. Right? So if I was raised in a certain group or a certain gender or a certain culture, what is my experience of working in this organization? Has it been uplifting, or has it been problematic, where I've experienced microaggressions or lack of awareness, lack of understanding? What has happened to me? What is my experience? And then what is your experience? And it's only when we start sharing those experiences that we start finding where the pain points are, but also where we could possibly make a difference, and what possible solutions are available to us. When we try to tackle this from a head place, let me think about what's going on in an organization, instead of a heart place. What are people's direct experiences of working in this organization around these areas of diversity, inclusion? Unless we get to that heart place, to those experiences, then we're going to miss out on so many opportunities for not only understanding, but also, when we're sharing experiences like this, stereotypes start dissolving, and people start going, oh, wow, now I understand what it's like for you. This is what it's been like for me. And again, I'm going to go back to that word alignment, right? We have alignment around experiences. So here's a really good example. I have colleagues, well, one colleague in particular, who works with young men in Ireland who are Protestant and Catholic. Now, these young men come into the room where Paul is working with them, and they are literally ready to kill each other. I'm not being euphemistic. I mean, it's very real. Right? Yeah. Very an intense amount of hatred is there. And so the first thing he has people do is put a Protestant young man and a Catholic young man together, facing each other, And one person gets to go first. They both get to do this, and they both share their experiences of growing up Catholic and Protestant in this environment. And what happens by just sharing those stories is that those barriers start dissolving, those stereotypes start dissolving, and true understanding of who each person is, right? Not a category or a label like, oh, Protestant or Catholic, but who that person is. That is what happens, that understanding of who that person is. And they end up forming very tight bonds together. Now, the reason my colleague Paul does this is because these are the future leaders. And if we don't use story in this way to start dissolving these stereotypes and these divisions and these barriers and these separations, then how can we lead? How can anybody lead us into a positive future? So that's just one little example and story about how powerful storytelling can be, and how once we understand each other's experiences through story, amazing things can happen.
It's a fantastic story.
I think we also have a question in the chat box by Vandana saying that, on the similar line of women, the portion of women in leadership is extremely low. And if all of us want to, make a tiny bit effort to push that, how can that be done? How can we encourage more women to not probably quit their jobs and leave their career midway? What do you think we can do something about it through stories?
Well, your question actually has many structural, issues related to it.
Absolutely.
Are there the right structures in place in an organization? But you asked the question about story, and I work with a lot of women executives, and the reason that I work with them is because they see storytelling as giving them an edge that sometimes other people in the organization ignore because they don't value it. And it does give women an edge because all of a sudden their communication is much more powerful and impactful, and they become more influential as a result. So storytelling is all about, when you build your storytelling skills, you will notice that you do become automatically more influential. You become more inspiring. You gather more followers. So I think that telling in this arena that you just mentioned, Shorty. So does that help? Does that make sense at all?
It does. It does. The other thing that generally comes to my mind is that when we share as women folk working in an organization, predominantly, male-dominated organizations, sometimes I think it's very important to share our personal stories with each other. Coming back to your point that, making that connection and sharing our struggles so that, each one of us understand that each one of us are struggling to survive in this environment, but still we are surviving, making an effort to survive. So yes, that way is also stories are very powerful to make each one of us realize that we're not alone. All of us are making that effort.
Right.
True.
Right. And I love what some people are saying in the chat box, right? So about sharing stories of role models, sharing stories of our successes. I mean, I didn't get into graduate school because I was accepted. I got into graduate school because I was actually rejected. And I called up the head of the department and I was asking, so why did that happen? And he wasn't giving me a straight answer. So I said, okay, listen, you don't have to answer me, but I will tell you, I'm going to move to Philadelphia and I'm going to keep bugging you all until you let me in. So you might as well just give up now.
True.
And he just broke up laughing, and he said, "Okay, Karen, if you want it that much, I'm going to tell you how to get in."
Absolutely.
And he told me the back doorway to get into graduate school. I did exactly what he said, and after the first semester, I was admitted into the department. But it's sharing stories like that about the ways that we find to work through the system, or to get around the system so that we can be successful, that helps others realize, oh yeah, maybe I can do it a particular way, or you did it that way. Oh, now I have an idea about how maybe I could do it.
True.
Right?
Give strength to each one of us. Yeah.
Yeah, and so to the point in that somebody made in the chat box, it's like, yeah, sharing those stories can be really, really powerful.
True.
So Vivek Sharma is asking, how can we apply the power of business storytelling in executive coaching, Karen?
Well, I think the entire experience of executive coaching is storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
So you're asking the person, tell me what's going on, right? And then you're working with that person on shifting the story so that they can get to their next level of greatness. So what needs to happen in your story for you to get to that next place, right? So storytelling for personal development or for personal growth, right? And that is often what's happening in an executive coaching session. Can be a very important tool to use. In addition to, let's develop strategies, let's develop action steps, so I think all of that works together really well. So I hope that makes sense and answers the question. I actually did a 3-hour workshop recently for a group just on storytelling and personal development. So there's a lot that is involved there.
Questions. Should we open it up for questions? Would anybody like to unmute and come on the screen and ask Karen any questions they might have?
I see there's one in the chat box, which is, how does a brand develop the skills of storytelling? And is there a basic structure? And
hi, this is Vandana.
Hi.
Hi, Karen. Hello, Justin. Hello, Shruti.
Hey, Vandana.
Hi. I wanted to ask this question, this now storytelling is something that a lot of leaders have been using, or in fact, it is a personal style. However, recently storytelling has been catching up, a lot of, it's been in, everybody is talking about storytelling, but not everybody is convinced with storytelling. So, because I'm an HR consultant, and there are times when I actually approach my clients and my clients tell me that, how does this actually work? How do I make them understand this? I believe in the power of stories, but when it comes to the communication part of it, how do we communicate it to a person who's a non-believer?
That's a great question, Vandana. I've been working on that myself for a long time. And so I think there's always something to learn about how to approach people and how to, quote unquote, sell storytelling. So I think the first rule of storytelling is know your audience. And the second rule of storytelling is speak to your audience. So it depends on who you're speaking with, the story or the experience you want to share. So when somebody asks me, Karen, what do you do? Right? I say, well, I'm a business storyteller, but really what I do is I help leaders or organizations achieve amazing results together with each other. And I use storytelling as the way to have that happen. I say, like the time I worked with, and I'll name one of my clients, and I'll share a story. Now, what I said up until the story, that's interesting information, but I know the story is what is going to be the most meaningful for them. And so I always encourage people who are building their clientele around business storytelling, building their practices around business storytelling, is to make sure you've got some stories in your hip pocket to share with people. And these are what I call people and results stories. Because what happens when, as another piece about the neuroscience of storytelling, is that when somebody hears a story, and if they're hearing a story about a client that you worked with, it's actually running like a computer simulation on their brain. And they're trying you out for size. This is how they get to know, oh gosh, I want that kind of a result. And Vandana helped that person do that. I like Vandana. I should work with Vandana. So then Vandana, does that help at all? Or do you have a follow-up question on that?
No, it does help. I understand that, in order to convince a non-believer, it is important to probably present a story with the same storyline, but different names.
Right.
I hope.
And the other thing I say to some executives is, storytelling has been around for more than 100,000 years. We are hardwired for storytelling. We tell stories all the time. Who would not want to leverage that in business?
True. Yeah. Well, thanks, Vandana, for a great question. Rahul, yes, please go ahead, ask the question.
Yeah. So I hope you are able to hear me.
Yeah.
So my question is regarding the success stories in organization. So normally companies try to share the success stories of some employees about how great work has been done. And that is how organization understands stories, the word story. So that is mainly for the appreciation and encouragement. So that is the purpose of those success story sharing. But actually, most of the time, it has the opposite effect. Means people to feel that, okay, what has been shared has some different intentions and all. People actually don't get encouraged, but they get maybe they start some gossiping starts in the organization because of that. So my question is, what should change in telling the success story so that it should have the desired effect?
Well, first of all, it has to be authentic.
Yeah.
Okay. And, people who work in companies are very sensitive to this, and they don't want to be quote unquote sold to any more than a customer wants to be sold to, right?
Yeah.
And so when the only stories that an executive tells or a leadership team tells is about the rosy picture, when in fact people in the organization know all of the warts and where things are not going well, then what happens is that trust is undermined.
Yeah.
And that's when you start getting all of those other kinds of negative stories. Now, negative stories are always going to happen in an organization. You're never going to get rid of those, right? So the best way to think about it is, what is a percentage of positive stories that people are actually rallying around, right? And hopefully the percentage of those negative stories is small compared to the other. So I think, again, I'm going to go back to the first step in working with stories in an organization is for the executive to learn how to listen stories out of people in an executive team even, so that they can go anywhere in the organization and understand what people's real experiences are of working in the organization. so that then they can start shifting the stories in authentic ways and in very, how do I want to say, honest ways, instead of being this disconnect that happens between executives and the rest of the people working in the organization. And part of that disconnect, the result of part of that disconnect are stories that don't speak to people in the organization. And so there's a lot involved in your question, Rahul, but I hope I gave you a couple things to think about
Yes,
in that.
yes, definitely, sure. Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
very welcome. Love that question.
So we'll pick another question from the chat box. There's a question from Manpreet. He says that how do we leverage storytelling in productivity management?
In productivity. Well, stories, when they are shared, first of all, you want to share great stories, right? So a lot of storytelling that's out there is mediocre at best. So you have to learn how to really tell a good story. Stories are really, can be very empowering and very motivational and inspiring. And they also build alignment because all of a sudden people are on the same page about what needs to happen and when. You can tell people, oh, here's the deadline. This is what you need to do to get to the deadline. But also with that, I think it's also very important to share stories about, oh, here's where we are. Here's some of the difficulties we are facing, right? And to get everybody to share their experiences, but not in a downer way, not in a way that's negative, but in a way that, okay, so what can we learn from our stories and what about the next steps that we need to take? And so what happens when storytelling becomes part of everyday work, people become inspired. Again, alignment is often a result of that. And then what happens is that people become more productive because they know what's happening, and some friction, right, that is in the working group may have, evaporated as a result. So I'm giving you some things to think about in a very inexact science, right? How storytelling can actually improve productivity. So there are a number of steps that have to happen along the way, but I've seen it happen. Like, look at what happened with the medical group, the stories of compassionate care, and how that caught on like wildfire in the organization. And not only did patient satisfaction scores go up, but everybody's employee satisfaction scores went up, right? So this all helps an organization become more productive. So, okay, that's my long-winded answer for that.
That's good. So audience, do we have any more questions? Anyone would like to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Hi, can I ask a question?
Yes.
My name is
Yeah,
Aarti.
Yes,
See, I'm going to ask something. I'm going to the basics of storytelling. See, I have a jewelry brand and I know who my target audience are. I know what my USP is, but my struggle is with forming the story. Is there a structure or, any guidance you can give for, dummies like us who don't know how to form a story, but then want to convey a story to our customers?
Yes. So, there are 7 signature stories that every company needs to tell about itself. And at times you're going to want to share an origin story of how you got started. And this is how Justin opened up our conversation today. Karen, tell us how you got started in this business, right? It's because people always want to know that, and it's a beginning way to build trust. But Arathi, when you are working in wanting to have your jewelry more visible and have more business growth as a result, then the kinds of stories that you need to tell are people and results stories. So these are stories of your customers who have worn your jewelry and how much they've enjoyed that experience and what it's actually meant to them, right? And when you can share those kinds of stories, then other people say, oh, I want that experience. I want to have happen like what happened with so-and-so, right? And so how that story is constructed is, first of all, you're not the hero of the story. Your customer is the hero. The biggest mistake companies make is that, oh, this is how we saved the day for somebody. This is the difference we made in somebody's life. So it's all about us, man. But it really is all about the customer. So what happened to the customer? What was their experience? What happened for them? And you're just the supporting character. So that's a way to think about that story. And then the actual structure is, it could be, well, the setting. Here, I met this person, or this person contacted me online, and then you share the problem, right? This person was really interested in X, right? She wanted to find a piece of jewelry that reminded her of her, sister, her mother, a friend. And so I helped her choose a piece of jewelry. And then the result is that she wore it. Whenever she wears that piece of jewelry, she gets so many compliments. And now I just made that up, right? Right now. But it's basically the pattern is the setting, the problem, the action steps, and the result. And so that's the way I would encourage you to think about a story structure. Trying to think if there's also every story has characters, right? There are people involved. So make sure there are names and faces attached to it, your customers. It's just not a generic customer. It's actually, the person's name. Right, if you can use that, or to make up a person's name in case they need their to be anonymous, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, I hope that helps, Arti.
Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
Arti, I would like to just add to what Karen was saying, is that you are in an amazing line of work. You're dealing with products which has a lot of emotions attached to it. I mean, people are buying jewelry not just to make themselves feel good, but because it's invariably an occasion like a wedding or a engagement or a gift, a bridal, part of a bridal package and things. So the thing is to move away from thinking of your product to thinking about what your customer is feeling when she is buying your product and wearing your product and the experience that she's going through. And so the trick is to get those stories. You need to speak to them. So when they're buying it, ask them what are they buying it for and things like that. And then maybe after the wedding or the whatever the occasion is, to call them up and find out how did that occasion go and capture that. The two things happen. One is they'll feel thrilled that the jeweler called me up to find out how it happened. And two is you get a first-hand view of that emotion attached to your product. That becomes your story. And you have a collection of stories, you narrate them, and you're moving away from your product, and you're actually adding value to the jewelry that you're selling.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Any last question? We have actually shot over almost half an hour over the time. So thanks everyone for staying for that long. Thanks, Karen, for adjusting for that long. Okay, Deborah, you have a question? You're on mute. We can't hear you. Deborah, are you there?
Yes, I'm so sorry. No, I do not have a question at this time, but I really enjoyed it, Karen, and all of your comments.
Cool.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
Deborah. It's good to see you here.
Any other questions, anyone? Before we wrap up? Cool. Any last comments, Karen, Justin?
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. I mean, what I figured is that in an organizational situation, in any business situation, that stories percolate right through, and it's just a matter of thinking of, how can I apply stories in this situation, and arriving at it. Even if you don't do a course in storytelling, it's a matter of, how do I connect with this person? What are the stories that I can tell? What does this remind me of? And get personal. And you're pretty much, on that journey of using storytelling in business. You can't go wrong, is my takeout.
Yeah, that's true. You cannot go wrong. It only enhances everything that you're doing.
So thank you so much, Karen. It was absolutely wonderful to host you. It's practically a masterclass, like somebody wrote on the chat box, a masterclass for us on storytelling. In the limited time that we had, we did cover a lot of areas. So thank you so much.
Oh,
Thank you all.
It's my pleasure. I'm so happy to be here. And